A glass of red wine flew straight into my wife's face, right there in the wedding hall. The whole room went silent. I stood there in my old suit watching Rose tremble. A small tear had appeared on the expensive wedding dress of my daughter-in-law. What froze my blood wasn't the wine. It was my son's voice behind me, sharp and cold. "Mom, kneel down and apologize. Don't ruin my day." In that moment, I understood. This wedding was never meant to bring our family together. It was the moment everything began to fall apart. If you're listening to this story up to now, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Maybe in your car, in a dark room, or after a long, exhausting day. I read every single word, and I know this much. Behind every listener, there's a story that has never been told. And next, I'll tell you what really happened after that glass of red wine. I still remember the smell of red wine hanging in the air, as people slowly turned their faces away, pretending nothing had happened. Rose stood in front of me, her hands shaking. She didn't cry. She didn't react. She just stood there, as if her body had shut itself down so she wouldn't collapse right there. I knew that feeling. It's the feeling of someone who realizes they've just been pushed out of their own family. Tiffany's wedding dress had only a small tear near the hem. Rose had stumbled while trying to avoid a chair that had been pushed into the aisle. No one fell. There was no scream, just an ordinary, clumsy moment of real life. But to Tiffany, it was an excuse. I saw the change in her eyes instantly, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She shouted, grabbed a glass of wine from a nearby table, and did something I never thought I'd witness at a wedding. I took half a step forward, the instinct of a husband, but I stopped when Tyler turned toward me. The look in his eyes wasn't the look of the son I had raised for 3 decades. It was cold, rushed, and full of worry, not for his mother, but for the people watching. Tyler scanned the room, the business partners, the people he hoped would open doors for his career. Then he turned back to Rose. "Mom, please just apologize," he said, his voice low but clear. "Don't make this more complicated." That sentence was heavier than any glass of wine. I heard a few whispers behind me. No one stepped forward. No one asked if my wife was okay. In that room, Rose and I were nothing more than unwanted guests. Tiffany walked closer, pointing at the floor where a few drops of wine stained the carpet. She talked about reputation, about money, about how that dress was irreplaceable. I don't remember her exact words. I only remember the feeling of being forced to stand still, like an old object that had lost its value. Tyler handed his mother a napkin. He tossed it lightly, just enough for everyone to see. Then he said the words I'll never forget, that Mom should step outside because she was embarrassing him. Rose lowered her head, not to apologize, but because she was tired. I saw her shoulders sink. I knew what she was thinking, that maybe she really was at fault. That maybe if she had been quieter, more careful, things would have been different. That woman had lived through illness. She had learned to walk slowly, just to avoid bothering anyone. And now, at her own son's wedding, she was trying to disappear. I placed my hand on my wife's back. I said nothing. I didn't argue. I gently turned her around. In that moment, I chose not to fight. Not because I was weak, but because I understood something very clearly. People who humiliate you in public are not people you can reach with emotion. They only understand consequences. We left the hall through a narrow side exit. The music behind us grew louder, as if the celebration had never been interrupted. I heard laughter return. That hurt more than anything. I opened the car door and helped Rose sit down. She asked softly, almost in a whisper, if she had ruined everything. I didn't answer right away. I started the engine. My hands were steady. I learned long ago that silence is sometimes the only way to keep things from breaking further. As the car rolled away from the estate, I looked back one last time. The lights were still on. Everything looked perfect, at least on the surface. I thought about the months leading up to that day, the papers I had signed, the calls Tyler always avoided, the look in Tiffany's eyes whenever she talked about the future. Suddenly, it all fit together frighteningly clear. I wasn't angry the way people might expect. I didn't want to shout. I just felt a door inside me close. Not the door of love for my son, but the door of innocence. From that moment on, I knew I would no longer be a father who simply stood and watched. But I also knew this. Whatever I did next, I would do it quietly, and I would see it through to the very end. The car drove on for a long stretch, without either of us saying a word. Rose leaned her head back against the seat, her eyes closed, as if the moment she spoke she would break down. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, but in my mind the wedding wasn't over. It had only just begun, in a different way. There are moments in life when old memories return on their own without being invited. That night, as I sat beside the bed watching Rose drift in and out of sleep, what happened 6 months earlier came back clearer than ever. Back then, Tyler came over with a stack of papers. He said Rose needed long-term care insurance just in case her health relapsed. He said it carefully. Like a son worried about his mother, Tiffany sat beside him quiet. Her hand rested on Rose's hand. She wore a gentle smile. Rose believed them immediately. She always trusted her son. As for me, I read through the papers, but I read them as a father, not as an investigator who had faced hundreds of fraudulent files. The text was printed beautifully, clean. There was nothing that would make an ordinary person suspicious. So I signed. Not because I was careless, but because I trusted them. I believed that inside this house no one had a reason to set a trap. Only later did I understand this truth. People don't use a hammer to destroy something valuable. They use paperwork. After the wedding, when Rose was asleep, I opened the old cabinet again. I took out copies of those documents from that year. This time I read slowly, very slowly. Each line revealed a different meaning. Not insurance, not care. It was authorization, collateral, control over assets, placed into someone else's hands. I didn't call Tyler. I didn't do anything at all. I just sat there feeling something shift inside me. Pain gave way to clarity, and once clarity arrives, the pieces begin to arrange themselves. I remembered the times Tiffany talked about a life one deserves, about relationships that needed investment, about how Rose should rest more. Back then I thought it was concern. Now I understand. It was preparation. One afternoon after the wedding, I returned to the estate using the excuse of dropping off a forgotten gift. The party was over. No music, no lights. The house felt empty and cold. I passed by the bridal room. The door wasn't locked. On the table there was a folder that hadn't been put away yet. I hadn't planned to look, but a lifetime of experience wouldn't let me turn my back. I opened it. The figures were clear. Spending plans, timelines, and one line underlined carefully. Long-term care for Rose. Cost-saving option. Cost-saving. A very pleasant word. But beneath it was the name of a facility I recognized. Not a place for recovery, a place where people send those who no longer have a voice. I closed the folder. My hands didn't shake, and I saw something clearly. That glass of red wine that night wasn't impulsive. It was part of a process. The fastest way to push Rose out and make her removal look justified. There was one more thing. In those pages there were names. One of them belonged to a man I had seen Tiffany speaking with for a long time at the wedding. The man Tyler called Boss. I had seen eyes like his before. The eyes of people who believe they stand above the law. That night I sat in the car for a long time before driving home. I thought about Tyler, about how much he truly knew, and I understood the cruelest truth of all. He knew everything. He knew who Tiffany was relying on. He knew where the money came from, and he accepted it. Not out of love, but out of fear of losing the position he had just gained. Some people betray out of hatred. Some betray out of ambition. But the most dangerous kind are those who betray because they believe they have no other choice. The next day, as I drove Rose to her follow-up appointment, I watched her through the rearview mirror. She asked me softly if I was okay. I told her I was fine. That wasn't a lie. It was a decision. From that moment on, I no longer saw Tyler and Tiffany as children within a family. I saw them as an open case. And like every case I had ever handled, I knew one thing clearly. To expose the truth, you first have to let them believe they are safe. I grew quieter, gentler. I let them think we had accepted being pushed aside. And in that silence, an investigation had begun. No noise, no anger, just time and the truth waiting to be named. The silence stretched on for days after that. No one called us, not even Tyler. Tiffany, on the other hand, posted honeymoon photos, elegant dinners, perfect lighting, carefully arranged congratulations. Rose scrolled through them once, then turned off her phone. I didn't stop her. I just memorized the timing, the places, and the names that kept appearing again and again in those photos. I started with the smallest things. Bills. Expenses that looked harmless at first glance. I didn't use my own computer. I used an old one, not connected to any accounts. I wasn't in a hurry. I learned long ago that rushing is usually a sign of emotion, and at that moment, I didn't allow myself emotion. Every morning I walked Rose around the neighborhood, slowly, steadily, so she could recover. Every afternoon, while Rose rested, I opened the backed-up files. Tyler thought he had been careful, but he forgot one thing. Young people often erase traces in ways they think are clever. They don't understand that what remains after deletion is often the real clue. I traced a charity fund Tyler was overseeing. A small one, low profile, operating under the name of supporting the legal community. The transfers were split into small amounts, spread out evenly, like rain, not large enough to raise immediate suspicion, but consistent enough to form a stream. And that stream eventually flowed to one place, an intermediary account under the name of a newly formed media company, Tiffany's Company. I didn't jump to conclusions. I kept checking, day after day. Every number was cross-checked. Every expense was questioned. I wasn't looking for outrage. I was looking for consistency. And once consistency appears, the truth has nowhere left to hide. That's when I understood why the wedding had to be so extravagant. Not to celebrate, but to clean, to cover. A large celebration is often the best way to legitimize money that shouldn't exist. Flowers, lights, music, all of it, just a shell. Rose never asked what I was doing. One evening, she only said one thing: "Don't let this turn you into someone else." I nodded. I didn't tell her I had already become someone else on the night of that wedding. I only promised her this. Everything I was doing was to protect her, not to destroy anyone. When I had enough data, I thought about that man. The guest of honor. The one Tiffany always stood close to. The one Tyler always bowed his head to. I didn't call him directly. I sent a very short email from an unfamiliar address. No threats, no accusations. Just an invitation to meet, with a single line attached. "I think you'll want to see what I have before anyone else does," he replied faster than I expected. We met at a quiet cafe far from the city center. He arrived early. I arrived on time. I didn't bring everything, just enough for him to understand who he was sitting across from. I didn't say much. I let him read. I watched how his hand paused on certain figures. I knew then I had touched the right spot. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I didn't want money. I didn't want a deal. I only wanted the truth placed where it belonged, at the right time. I told him that if he valued his reputation, he would understand the value of cooperation. He stayed silent for a long time. Then he nodded. That night, I came home late. Rose was still waiting. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just made tea and placed the cup in front of me. I held her hand. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe slowly again. The investigation had crossed the boundary of family. It became something that people with responsibility could no longer ignore. I didn't call it revenge. I called it putting things back where they belonged. In the days that followed, I received copies of internal emails, sudden meetings canceled, trips postponed. Tyler began calling me more often. His voice had changed, careful, guarded. I listened. I responded like a concerned father. I gave away nothing. That was the hardest part, playing someone who knows nothing. When you've already seen the entire picture, I prepared what needed to be done step by step. No confrontations, no warnings. I understood very well. For people like Tyler and Tiffany, collapse doesn't come from shouting. It comes from the moment they realize that every door they believed was safe had been locked for a long time. And when everything was in place, I knew the moment was close. Their honeymoon wouldn't end the way they imagined. Not with laughter, but with silence. The kind of silence that only arrives when there is nothing left to hide. That night arrived faster than I expected. There were no warning signs, no ringing phone, just a very clear feeling that everything had reached a point of no return. I stood outside the estate as the clock edged closer to a new day. Inside, the lights were still on. Tyler and Tiffany had just returned from their last party before the trip to Paris. I didn't go in right away. Not because I hesitated, but because I had learned that truth needs the right moment to speak for itself. When I knocked, Tyler opened the door. He froze when he saw me. Not out of surprise, but out of fear. I saw it clearly. Tiffany stood behind him, her smile stiff on her lips, as if she were trying to remember what she had missed. I walked in slowly. No bag, no folder. I said only one thing, that I had come to finish something left unfinished. Tyler asked me to sit down. His hand trembled slightly as he poured water. Tiffany didn't sit. She leaned against the counter, her eyes drifting again and again toward the stairs. Less than 10 minutes later, the others arrived. No noise, no display, just people with authority entering the room the way one enters a place that needs to be examined. Tyler jumped to his feet. Tiffany asked what was going on. No one answered right away. I sat there listening to my own breathing. I felt no satisfaction, no relief, only a sense that order was being restored, little by little. When they began to speak, I finally did too. I spoke slowly, clearly. I said I wasn't there to demand money. I was there to bring into the light what had been hidden behind bright lights and polite congratulations. The screen came on, not with numbers first, but with security footage from the wedding. The angle wasn't flattering, not dramatic, but it was clear enough to show Tiffany deliberately placing the chair out of line, clear enough to show Rose stumbling, and clear enough to catch Tiffany's expression just before the glass of wine was thrown. No one spoke for several seconds. Tiffany stepped back. Tyler turned toward me, his mouth opening then closing again. He didn't ask where I got the video. He just looked at me like I was a stranger. Then came the documents. No long explanations needed. Transfers, signatures, dates lining up perfectly. I watched Tyler sink into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Tiffany began speaking rapidly, disconnected sentences, trying to separate herself from everything. But to the people in that room, words no longer mattered more than consistent data. The man Tiffany had relied on wasn't there, but his absence said enough. From the moment he chose silence, I knew Tiffany had lost her final support. She looked around the room, searching for a single gaze that might stand with her. There was none. I stood up. I said that from here on, this was no longer a family matter. It was a matter of responsibility. I said Rose would not be forced to leave her home. Not because I had managed to keep it, but because no one had the right to push her out for the convenience of someone else's plan. Tyler called out to me. For the first time that night, he called me Dad. His voice broke. He said he had no choice. I looked at him for a long time. I didn't answer right away. I said only one thing. Something I had thought about for a long time. There is no choice that forces you to betray the people who protected you when you were at your weakest. As they led Tyler away, Tiffany collapsed onto the floor. No one touched her. No one comforted her. The room grew strangely quiet. I could hear the wall clock ticking. I could hear the wind outside. And I realized this. The truth doesn't need to raise its voice. It only needs not to be stopped. I left the estate as dawn approached. I didn't look back. I knew that behind me was a door now closed. Not because I closed it, but because what was inside no longer had a place for me. On the drive home, I thought of Rose. I thought of the morning ahead when I would tell her everything, using the gentlest words I could find. I thought about how, in the end, I had done the only thing I could do, not let my silence be mistaken for acceptance. Their wedding night ended not with promises. It ended with the truth. And for me, that was enough. The next morning arrived very gently. No ringing phone, no urgent calls. Sunlight slipped through the bedroom curtains and rested on Rose's face. She was sleeping more deeply than usual. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, just to be sure she was okay. Last night had taken many things from us, but at least it gave us back our peace. When Rose woke up, she asked a very simple question. "Is it over?" I nodded. I didn't go into details. I only told her this. From now on, no one could force her out of her own life again. Rose looked at me for a long time. Then she took my hand. She didn't cry. She didn't ask more. She understood that some truths don't need to be fully spoken to be felt. The old house was no longer a place we should return to. Not because of paperwork, but because it held too many memories of days when we tried to hold together a family that no longer existed the same way. I sold what we didn't need. We kept a few suitcases, a few old photographs, and a map already folded. The RV wasn't new, but it was strong enough for a long road. Rose liked sitting by the window watching small towns pass by. I drove slowly. No schedule, no fixed destination, We stopped when we were tired, and moved on when we felt ready. For the first time in many years, I didn't have to control anything except the steering wheel. Some evenings we parked near the ocean. Rose made tea. I sat outside listening to the waves. No one mentioned Tyler. No one mentioned Tiffany. Not because we forgot, but because we no longer let them decide how we felt. The call came one late afternoon, an unfamiliar number. I knew who it was before I picked up. Tyler spoke slowly, as if afraid I might hang up. He apologized. No excuses, no blame. He said that for the first time in his life, he had time to think without anyone pushing him. He asked if I could help him. I looked at Rose. She couldn't hear the call, but she understood. I turned back to Tyler and spoke as calmly as I could. I told him I wouldn't interfere. Not because I hated him, but because some lessons can only be learned when there are no shortcuts. I said that if one day he truly understood what responsibility meant, we could talk again. But not now. The call ended quickly. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt that things were finally settling where they belonged. We kept moving. Along long roads, quiet towns, small diners, where no one asks who you are, only what you'd like to drink. Rose grew stronger each day. She smiled more. Some mornings, she woke up before me, made coffee, and opened the RV door to let the wind in. I thought a lot about the meaning of family. I used to believe it was protected by sacrifice and silence. I was wrong. Family cannot exist when respect becomes something negotiable. When you allow others to cross your boundaries, you don't keep the peace. You only extend the damage. One evening, Rose said she no longer felt afraid. Not afraid of being a burden. Not afraid of walking slowly. Not afraid of saying what she needed. I listened and nodded. That was all I had ever wanted for her. We stopped at a national park where the sky felt wide open, and the silence was deep enough to hear your own thoughts. I stood beside Rose, watching the sunset. I didn't feel like I had won. I just felt that I had protected what mattered most, our dignity and the peace of the person I love. This story doesn't end with applause. It ends with a long road ahead, one that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. And at my age, that's a good enough ending. Thank you for listening to the story of an old father. I didn't tell it to complain, but to preserve something fragile and important, respect within a family. If this story made you pause for a moment, think a little, or remember someone you love, please like, subscribe, and share so stories like this can continue to be told. Every bit of support doesn't just help the channel survive. It helps these quiet lessons reach more people. The lesson I learned is very simple. Family is not a place where you win or lose. Family is where you are treated like a human being. When respect disappears, leaving is not weakness. It is the final way to protect your dignity. Thank you for staying until the end. I wish you the clarity to protect what truly matters, and the gentleness to cherish those who are sincere by your side.